Hello Mech Warriors, Steven here with Rabbit Hobbies. On May 7th, Clan Ghost Bear returns with the release of the Mechwarrior 5 Flashstorm DLC. There's an all-new campaign, new mechs, elementals, even fighting on the hull of spaceships. There's 4 new Omnimechs, the Nightgyre, the Ebon Jaguar, the Fire Moth, and the Huntsman. Also 4 new battle mechs, the Kodiak and the clan versions of the Jenner, the Hunchback, and the Rifleman. As a longtime fan of the Mechwarrior games, and someone who's getting into the tabletop, I decided to make a video about painting the Ghost Bears from the new expansion, the elite unit known as the Silveroot Keshik. I'll be painting a lance of the new mechs from the game, and I will try my best to match their color scheme. I'll show you my steps and you can paint your own. Do you accept my bachal? For my Ghost Bears, I decided to go with a clan heavy star with 1 medium mech, 3 heavies, and 1 assault mech. Of course, I had to include the Kodiak in this. His CGL sculpt just goes so hard. And after all, he is on the cover. This time around, I decided to apply my basing texture before priming. For a really rocky look, I'm going for a mix of sand and also some ground up cork. This cork I literally threw in a blender. It gives me a nice mix of many different sizes of rocks. In a small condiment cup, I mix up a blend of the sand and also the cork. Once I'm happy with the blend, I glue it down with some watered down PVA glue. The water lowers the viscosity and allows the basing material to stick to the base rather than just sitting on top of the glue. Once it's all mixed up, I paint it on and then dip the models. I give it a little shake as well to make sure that the base is evenly coated. I went ahead and did this to all 5 members of the lance. To round out my heavy star, I went with a Rifleman 2C, a Nightgyre, an Ebon Jaguar, and a Huntsman. These I 3D printed so that their models were closer to the in-game mechs. I like the CGL sculpts, I just wanted to match the game. I attached my mechs to the painting handles using some poster tack. These painting handles work as well as any that I've paid for before and are a lot cheaper. I made these years ago out of a single wooden dowel and some washers. The washers are handy if I magnetize my miniatures. The dowel is about 30 millimeters in diameter and I found this is perfect for my hand. I primed all the mechs gray with some Stynel res. I almost always use a gray or a black primer as my start. Even when painting white, I don't usually go with a white primer. You see, when you're painting white, you're not actually painting white all that often, not pure white. Depending upon if you're going for like a cooler or warmer white, you're going to start with other shades. Maybe a cream or eggshell color if you're going for warmth. Or neutral grays or even blues if you're going for a colder tone. I decided I wanted these guys to be kind of on the neutral side. So I got my airbrush ready with some flow improver and some thinner. And for my first brighter layer, I decided to use bright neutral gray. Always flow improver first. This prevents tip dry and clogging. Then I add my paint. Last, I use my thinner to get it to the consistency I need, which is about that of skim milk. White pigment tends to be kind of chunky. I have to make sure it gets properly thinned and mixed. I always do a quick test spray away from the model. This also makes sure that I don't splatter any paint. I cover about 70% of each mech with this bright neutral gray. I'm leaving a bit of the Stynel res gray primer in the darkest recesses, which will act as a shadow. This very bright gray paint that I'm using is actually my mid-tone. Because as one of my last steps I plan to oil wash, a lot of this is going to darken down. Something I always keep in mind when oil washing is I always go brighter than I think I need to. I do want these mechs to read as white when they're finished, but I also want them to look like they're battle hardened. When the Khan of the Ghost Bears decides to go to war personally, it's surrounded by his elite honor guard. The Silveroot Keshik is often in the thick of the fighting. I want their armor to look worn. I want it to look chipped and dinged and scratched. After all, this is how they look like in the images from the DLC. Alright, now it's time to go up to white. I'm using bold titanium white, one of the best whites I've ever used. But it's got really chunky pigment. It covers very well, but it's super thick.
Dummy thick.
Damn!
I make sure to spray from nearly directly above. This zenithal highlight is an extremely bright white, and I want to be careful not to blow out my shadows. It's easy to go way too far at this step. But this base coat is laying the groundwork for everything that comes later. Alright, now that my base tones are laid down, it's time to paint the weapons. These I base coated in dark neutral gray, leading up to a highlight of neutral gray. I'll be using my wet palette and brushing these on. Always roll your brush tip to maintain a point. At this point I'm just blocking in colors while looking at the reference images from the game. For the Night Gyre I can see that his hip, his waist, his feet, and his guns are this darker gray color. So for now I'm just blocking in and base coating these sections. Using the reference images I did the same for all of the other mechs. Noticing here that the white covers about 4/5 of the mech, whereas the darker gray is covering the remaining 1/5. The gun barrels are a different color as well, so I'm going to be painting those in a metallic, whereas the body of the guns is the same color as the missile pods. When I was looking at the reference images for the Rifleman 2C, I noticed something. Nearly every edge on all the mechs has this kind of black lining. It's like a mix of battle damage or some kind of weird reverse edge highlighting.
That's going to take up a lot of your time.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there. For now, I'm just going to finish blocking everything in. This Kodiak sculpt is really a joy to paint. Much more well-defined edges and just better paintability overall, which makes sense because it was designed as a miniature first and not as a video game asset. I add in my neutral gray to start working up to those highlights. I mix in a bit of the base tone, and I begin the process of edge highlighting all the darker gray bits. Edge highlighting is a necessary evil. One thing I always keep in mind when edge highlighting is that the lines always look lighter when they first go on, but after the paint dries it darkens down. I've learned to go a little bit lighter than my instinct tells me to. Next, I decided to use cobalt metal for all the gun barrels. This is a little bit darker metallic than I usually use, and it has a little bit of blue in it, which I feel like matches the screenshots. I also use this for the Kodiak's claws and for joints on the mechs. I got a little worried at this point that this is too much of a blue tone, but I figure I could always correct that with some more neutral silver highlights and also the oil wash. I decided to go with some dark aluminum to bring the color back into the warmer side of the spectrum. The blue was a bit too far. I decided that I was a lot happier with this tone. That's the great thing about mistakes in miniature painting, is you can just paint over them. Now for the claw marks, I decided to use burnt red and bold pyrrole red. I began freehand sketching the claw marks over the mechs. These ragged looking claw marks are easy to freehand, you don't have to be too careful. Now those who are really familiar with the lore for Clan Ghostbear may notice that the claw mark numbers in the video game are wrong. In the Battletech lore, the Silveroot Keshik has 3 claw marks. In the Flashstorm DLC, it's 3 or 4. Some of them have both. They also don't use the Silveroot Keshik icon. I don't know if this was from lack of attention to detail or if this was a deliberate retcon in their color scheme. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. It was about this stage in the painting that I feel like my miniatures entered something that we like to call the ugly phase. And yeah, this stage sucks. I felt like my white was too washed out looking. I was beginning to doubt my freehand. I had already second guessed myself on the cobalt. Our miniatures will often reach this ugly phase before they're finished, and this for me is where doubt creeps in. But I gotta try and push forward. I finished highlighting the claw marks using some bold pyrrole red, and it looked okay. I think my ADHD brain was experiencing something like a dopamine crash. I needed to feel like I was getting somewhere. I think for me, the slow drip of bash painting these mechs was affecting my concentration and ability to push forward. I needed to know this was all going to pay off, so I decided before bash painting the rest of the star, I was going to take the Kodiak all the way across the finish line, and if I was happy with the results, then I would finish. So I decided on light umber for the base. While I was doing the finishing steps on the Kodiak, I was also kind of coaching myself internally. I've done this a million times before. I know all about the ugly phase. Just keep pushing and it's all gonna turn out. I got this. Using some coal black, I rimmed my base. I knew that once I got past my oil wash, I was going to have a much more clear picture about how this miniature was going to turn out. After the black was finished, I also base coated the front facing of my mech with some of the red. I'll use my airbrush to put a nice color fade on this later. But for now, we just gotta seal everything in. I use some high gloss Liquitex varnish to seal my work. I can always use mineral spirits and go back to this original paint job if I need to. I prefer an airbrush to this, but I used to use rattle cans or even brush on varnish. It all gets the job done. I'm going to do a quick oil wash with some ivory black. No brown in this mixture at all. I really want these models to read as white, albeit a very worn and weathered battle-hardened version. Now this is an oil wash. If you're interested in a detailed tutorial, I'll have a link. Oil washing is my preferred method of washing now. It just has so many advantages over traditional acrylic washes. Longer working time, more control, you can always erase back to where you started. Here I'm going to save the rest of this oil wash for my other mechs. You can store this for a while and just need to give it a nice stir and it's ready to go. 90 minutes of drying time and I'm ready to clean up. Just a drop or two of mineral spirits on a makeup sponge. And I can already tell that I'm going to like how this is going to turn out. Just got to remove all the wash from the upper layers of the model. And I see that white pop right back up. I take my time working all over the model. I want to remove the bulk of the oil wash of the raised surfaces, but leave the nice dark panel lining in the recesses. And all of a sudden this model has so much more depth. I'm glad that I went so bright on my highlights, because now I have a depth of shadow that contrasted. Now again, I'm going back to the varnish, this time a matte varnish, to not only seal my work in, but knock down that shine. Alright, he's looking good, confidence is restored. Time for some more finishing touches. He's not so lily white anymore, a little bit more grungy, a little bit more weathered looking, but time for some paint chipping and some damage. For that I'm going to be using this little sponge tool. This will give me a nice paint chipping and battle damage effect. For this I'll use more coal black. Dip my sponge in it and get that paint all up in the sponge. And then I'll blot it out on a paper towel until it gives me a pattern that I like. When I do sponging, I make sure I use a gentle touch and I start with a kind of out of the way area to test it. I focus on edges and corners and I make sure to rotate the sponge to get different patterns. I start with the sponge for these major chips and then come back in with a brush for more control. I do more chipping with the brush and I also begin the kind of odd reverse edge highlights that we saw earlier. This gives a really cool effect and I'm definitely going to dip into this later with other models. Unlike when I traditionally edge highlight, I'm actually kind of skipping over and jumping and making this line a little bit jagged. Having a broken line is actually selling the idea that this is paint chipping that happened when the armor panels are scraping up against something. I could also see myself using this for like a cel-shaded mech. Thinking about that has gotten me a little bit excited. I think I might try that in the next Random Tech video. Have you guys seen anybody do a cel-shaded or comic book style mech? I think that would look really cool. Alright, so the black is looking pretty good, but I need to add some metal to my chips. I use some shining silver for this. I start out using this to highlight the gun barrels, the claws, and the joints. This also restores some shine and some gloss back to these areas that was lost during the matte varnish. The contrast in person is kind of interesting looking. It almost looks like a knife that has been scraped to reveal the clean metal underneath. It somehow makes the claws look sharper. I make sure to get the gun barrels in the shoulder and also the vents on the chest. These were darkened down a little too much and I wanted to bring back some shine. I also added some effective bare metal underneath some of the larger scrapes from the sponge painting. I also kind of stipple tapped little specks of silver on all the edge highlights. This really sold the effect of chipped paint and the bare metal underneath. Every bit of metal got some shine back this way. Alright, weathering's looking good, confidence restored. How about some special effects? Let's start with the glowy bit we see in the middle of his chest in the Flashstorm DLC artwork. I'll use blue and some sky blue to begin to build up this effect. I'll go all brush on this one. No airbrush required. So I'm base coating all around the fusion reactor area on the front of his chest. And I'm coloring outside the lines, imagining where the light would go. Adding a little sky blue to the mix and also some white blue. Now I'm gradually lightening up the raised areas, paying particular attention to where the glow is emanating from. The little orb at the center and also any sharp edges. Whatever might reflect the scattered light from the glow. This gives the impression of a light source. Whenever I do this kind of effect, I take my time and do lots of little micro adjustments, eventually building up to almost a pure white. It's the contrast that really sells the effect. I think it's looking pretty good, but I want to punch it up a little further. For that, I'm going to dip into my effects paint, the aptly named Plasma Coil Glow. This UV reactive paint really sells the glow effect. It looks really subtle on camera, but in person it's very bright. There's something about the way that our eyes pick up this paint in person. Just doesn't translate on camera. Under a black light, however, okay, maybe it's not that dramatic, but it still looks dope. I used Power Node Glow, another UV effects paint, for the eyes. Trying to replicate this orangey pinkish glow that we see in the eyes and the artwork from the DLC. I think it looks pretty good. It's super dramatic under the black light. It makes me want to set up some black lighting for like an urban game of Battletech. I think you could do some really cool effects with like city lighting. I decided to go even further and add some heat glow using radiation glow. I wanted to make it look like the Kodiak was venting heat. It's really subtle on camera, a little bit more dramatic in person, and again under the black light looks spectacular. To match the color on the missiles from the game, I used warm yellow. There's not actually missiles to paint, so I'm just kind of filling in the recesses. And it looked good enough. Using some silly putty and some Tamiya tape, I masked off the front facing of the base. I'm going to do my color fade to mark the front facing, and I don't want to get any overspray on the mech. It was kind of funny that his claws poked right through the silly putty. But I'm not spraying in that direction, it should be fine. Just gotta be careful. For the color fade, I'm spraying bold pyral red against the burnt red on the base. I build the red up in a couple quick layers. I test spray against my paint handle to make sure I'm getting the right pattern, and basically put a dot of red in the middle. When the paint's mostly dry, I peel the masking off. I like the way this looks. It's a little more subtle than I usually do for this. With that, I'm calling the Kodiak complete. Got my brain wrapped around this process, and I'm ready to go with the other mechs. I'm glad I finished him first, and it definitely restored my confidence in the project. Alright, scratch marks on the other mechs. Alright, that was dumb. But I warned you guys, I have ADHD. Here's how they're looking after the claw marks. Oh, and I did paint the Ebon Jaguar's canopy off camera. You see, the canopy details were so incredibly small when 3D printed. They were meant for video game textures, not actual paint. Trying to get my camera to focus on the details while wearing my magnifying glasses and zooming in super far, it was just really not working for me. I was really frustrated, so I did it off camera. And it was basically freehanding. But here's how it turned out. I know it looks like there's a raised surface here, but that was all just my paint. This was basically just a flat surface. I think I like the end result. But let me do the other canopies and I'll show you how I did it. First, I base coated the cockpit glass with burnt red. I didn't stress too much painting within the lines on this because I knew I was going to have to go in and paint in the struts anyways. I was more concerned about getting nice even coverage. And man, I swear my eyes are going on me. I ended up turning on a really bright overhead light so I could see a bit better. And that definitely helped a lot. The rifleman was pretty easy. The night gyre, like the huntsman, I didn't quite care if I was going in within the lines or not. It's a very thin canopy and I'm just going to fix it later. I did a second thin coat on each of them to get to full opacity. Now for highlights, I added in bold pyral red. I started with a blend of the two colors. Different from my usual way I do canopies, I went with the lighter red in the back part of the glass. Again, I'm trying to match the game. But that's good, I'm getting myself out of my comfort zone. And that's where growth happens. I built up my highlights all the way to pure bold pyrrole red. After I finished the cockpit glass, I moved on to fixing the struts. This is super delicate work and my hands are not as stable as they used to be. I always make sure to brace one hand against the other when doing details like this. To fix the rest of the canopies, I'm dipping back into the neutral gray. The Night Gyre has these crazy thin canopy struts that I tried to paint. This was bordering on masochistic here.
Suffer.
Lots of little tiny adjustments to be made, but I think it worked out pretty well in the end. Definitely see the advantage of the CGL sculpts now. The struts in the cockpit are just so much more well defined. But I wanted it to look like the game. Now the Huntsman was definitely a lot easier to fix. Just a steady hand and some patience and I was able to restore the cockpit struts. Still a lot more delicate than the official model would have been. Next, some more highlighting to give the illusion of raised texture, which is similar to what I did with the Ebon Jaguar. It was a bit of a hassle, but in the end I still have mechs that look like the in-game models. For the rocks on the base, I used some light umber again. And I applied this all over their bases. When you use a very thinned down paint like this onto a textured base, the raised areas of texture shows up a lot lighter. This is because the white undercoat is showing through the transparent paint. It's almost like the way a contrast paint works, especially using an oil wash. For some reason when I painted the Kodiak I didn't show this, but I used the gray to paint the rocks on the base. It kind of differentiates the smaller base texture from the larger ones that could represent larger boulders. Then I wet blend highlighted with the lighter gray. I base coated the front facing of each base in red to get them ready for their color fade later. And I rimmed the base of every mech in black. I masked them all up with Tamiya tape and silly putty like I did the Kodiak earlier, and I did their color fade. Usually I take this color fade to an almost white, but for the Ghost Bears I decided I didn't want it to look pink or orange. Once it was all dry I peeled off all the masking. It was fun watching the silly putty on this footage. Just a reminder that this stuff is a non-Newtonian fluid. I made a whole video about it if you want to check it out. Just click up there. Once again, sealing in all the work with a high gloss varnish. Real pro tip, make sure you're always wearing a mask when you're spraying like this. I'm using a full face respirator that covers my beard. Even if something is labeled as non-toxic, breathing in particulate is not good for you. Okay, varnish done. Using my same oil wash that I mixed when I was doing the Kodiak, you just have to make sure that you stir it up and this wash can last for a while. Like I did with the Kodiak, I gave all the Ghost Bears an all-over wash, including the base. Doesn't have to be precise, just get it everywhere. Then before it dries, you can wick off any excess. Once you've done that and it's looking pretty good, you can just wait 90 minutes for it all to dry. Then we're back to the cleanup stage again with mineral spirits and makeup sponges. 1 or 2 drops on the sponge and you're good to go. Always a super satisfying step in the process. What you're essentially doing with the mineral spirits is reactivating the pigments. So then you can clean them up and move them around. Then you end up with the pigments in all the places that you want them and none of the places that you don't. If you've used enamel washes like Streaking Grime or similar products, it's kind of like that. Except the oil wash gives you an even longer working time. And there's a massive number of oil paint colors to work with. Nearly any color you can think of. And quick as can be, these guys are almost done. Putting on a final matte varnish. This will bring the shine down and allow us to have another layer that we can paint over. Just going to be doing the layer of the edge highlighting and the weathering on top. For any model that you intend to game with, I always recommend a layer of varnish. This is especially true if you're ever working with metal miniatures. You need some kind of protective layer to prevent chipping. If you're planning on picking up any minis from Ironwind Metals, definitely varnish them after you're done painting. breaking out the brush again for edge highlighting and weathering in coal black. Just gotta run my brush around every little panel. Same as before, kind of jagged, sketchy looking lines. It's a slow going process, but gradually it looks better and better. Each mech has its own unique silhouette to learn. It's one of the reasons I've been falling in love with Battletech. You know, in Warhammer, if you're playing Space Marines, everything is just a Space Marine. Yeah, there's scout armor, there's intercessors, there's Gravis armor, but there's only so many variations within an army. If you want to collect multiple varying looks, you have to branch out and collect different armies. One of the things I think is really cool about Battletech is that every faction can field almost every kind of mech. Besides the distinction between clan and inner sphere, you're more restricted by timeline than anything else. Got a random mishmash of mechs you want to field? Make them mercenaries. Want to field a typically Davian mech and a Steiner force? It could be salvage. And you push the timeline forward far enough and clan and inner sphere doesn't really matter as much either. Everyone starts to get the clan tech eventually. Where I really want to sink my teeth into, though, is more of the lore, specifically the novels. When it comes to Battletech novels, where should I start? On the Warhammer side of things, I'm about halfway through the Horus Heresy. But I've yet to even start a single Battletech novel. All of my knowledge came from the video games. And obsessively reading Sarna. And you guys. And the edge highlighting and chipping is really starting to come together. In particular, I really like this rifleman. He's taking edge highlighting like a champ. I feel like he's really starting to resemble the in-game model. I definitely want to try applying this reverse edge highlighting on other mechs. Like I said before, maybe cell shading. Back again with the silver. And one more time, we're just kind of gently stroking or tapping along these lines. Just giving the subtle hint of bare metal peeking out from under the paint. I realize that this technique is very similar to the weathering that I use for my Tau. For those of you that are Battletech fans but don't know much about Warhammer, the Tau are basically the giant stompy robot faction. And for whatever reason, if you play Tau, people judge you harshly. But you guys don't do that, right? Like, we don't judge anybody for what faction you play in Battletech, right? Right?
What am I doing? I'm like,
Oh, hello, papagena. Tu le bella con la papaya.
Is the cat girl thing real? Asking for a friend. Alright, that's enough internet for me today. Good thing too, because we are done with our star. Time to show off the goods. Now that you've seen my mechs, tell me how I did. Am I a Rystar worthy of Clan Ghostbear, or am I some Desgra Surat? Let me know in the comments. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Remember to leave a like and sub if you haven't for more content like this. Until next time, Mech Warriors.
That's gonna take up a lot of your time.